You need to forgive to heal. While you hold on to resentment, you'll suffer. Forgiveness is the final step in healing. You've heard these phrases before, haven't you? Maybe from a therapist, from a religious leader, from a self-help book, from someone well-meaning who thinks they know what you need, and every time you hear it, something just feels off, because you can't forgive. You can't feel what everyone says you should feel. And it makes you think the problem is you, that you're too bitter, too resentful, incapable of spiritual growth. Today, I'm going to tell you what Carl Jung really said about forgiveness. And the truth will free you from a guilt that never should have been yours. Because Jung didn't preach forgiveness as the path to healing. He preached something much deeper and much more honest. And when you understand the difference, you'll stop feeling broken for not being able to forgive those who destroyed you. Let me start with a truth that no one wants to talk about. The pressure to forgive often serves the abuser, not the victim. Think about that for a moment. When someone hurts you deeply, and then society as a whole tells you that you need to forgive that person to get better, who really benefits? The person who hurt you gets absolution, gets the feeling that what they did wasn't so bad, gets permission to continue exactly as they are, with no real consequences. And you get another task, another thing you need to do to be considered a good and evolved person, another way to put someone else's needs above your own. Does this sound familiar? Because it's exactly what children of narcissists were trained to do their entire lives. Prioritize the other person, ignore their own pain, pretend everything's okay to keep the peace. The demand for forgiveness can be just another extension of that pattern. Another way to silence your experience in the name of appearing to be a good person. Jung never used the word forgiveness as the key to healing. What he talked about was integration. And integration is something completely different. Let me explain. Forgiveness means absolving the other person of what they did. It means saying what you did is okay, or at least doesn't matter anymore. It means releasing the person from responsibility for the damage caused. Integration doesn't require any of that. Integration means accepting that something happened, recognizing the impact it had on you, processing the emotions that got stuck, and incorporating that experience into your life story in a way that doesn't control you anymore. You can integrate a trauma without ever forgiving the person who caused it. You can heal completely and still consider what was done unforgivable. These two things aren't contradictions, they're completely separate processes. The lie you've been told is that you need forgiveness to release the pain. But the truth is that you can release the pain without absolving the person who caused it. You can stop suffering and still maintain clarity about what was done to you. You can find peace and still not pretend that everything's okay. Now let me tell you a story. A woman named Emily came to therapy at 38 years old. She had spent 2 years in therapy before, had read all the books, done all the exercises, and still something wasn't resolved. The previous therapist had insisted heavily on forgiveness, had said that Emily needed to forgive her narcissistic mother to finally be free. And Emily had tried. God knows how she had tried. She wrote letters of forgiveness that she never sent, did visualizations where she hugged her mother and said, "I forgive you," repeated affirmations about letting go of resentment and moving on. But every time she tried to feel forgiveness, something inside her revolted. An inner voice shouted, "It's not fair." And Emily thought that voice was the problem. Thought it was her ego resisting spiritual evolution. Thought it was immaturity, her inability to simply forgive and move on. The new therapist asked a different question. "Emily, what did your mother do to you?" And for the first time in 2 years of therapy, Emily could simply tell the story. without the pressure of reaching forgiveness at the end, without the expectation that the story needed to end with her hugging her mother. She told about the public humiliations, about being called stupid in front of guests, about never being good enough, no matter what she did, about the mother who competed with her, who sabotaged her relationships, who made everything about herself, even in the most important moments of Emily's life. She told about the wedding where her mother wore white, about the pregnancy where her mother said Emily was going to be a horrible mother, about years and years of small cruelties that accumulated into a mountain of pain. And when she finished telling the story, the therapist didn't say, "Now you need to forgive," and he said, "Emily, what your mother did was wrong. It was abuse, and you owe her nothing. You owe her nothing." Emily cried for half an hour, not from sadness, from relief. For the first time, someone had given her permission to feel what she really felt, without the pressure of transforming that pain into something more beautiful, without the requirement to absolve the person who hurt her, without the guilt of not being able to forgive. And a strange thing happened in the following weeks. The anger that Emily carried began to diminish, not because she had forgiven, but because she finally had permission to feel. The anger that was stuck because it had nowhere to go began to move, began to be processed, began to lose power. Emily didn't forgive her mother. Even today, years later, she hasn't forgiven her, but she doesn't carry the pain in the same way anymore. She integrated, she processed, she healed. Without the forgiveness that everyone said was necessary, Jung understood something fundamental about the human psyche. We don't heal by forcing emotions. We don't feel. We heal by allowing the real emotions to have space. When you try to force forgiveness before processing anger, you're not healing. You're suppressing. You're pushing the pain down and putting a pretty mask on top. And that suppressed pain will come back. It always comes back, in the form of depression, of anxiety, of physical symptoms, of relationships that repeat the same pattern. True healing requires you to feel first, feel the anger, feel the sadness, feel the injustice, feel everything that's been trapped for years. While you tried to be a good person who forgives, only after feeling and processing can you choose what to do with those emotions. And forgiveness may or may not be part of that choice, but it is a choice, not an obligation, not a prerequisite for healing or recovery, not a test of spiritual evolution. Now, let me explain why the pressure to forgive is so common and why it can be so harmful. The narrative of forgiveness serves several social functions. First, it maintains the peace. If the victim forgives, everyone can pretend that nothing happened. There doesn't need to be confrontation. There don't need to be consequences. There doesn't need to be the discomfort of recognizing that something wrong was done. Second, it protects the family. Dysfunctional families have a huge interest in maintaining the status quo. If you forgive, you stop asking uncomfortable questions. You stop pointing out problematic behaviors. You stop being the difficult person who insists on talking about the past. Third, it releases others from the responsibility of supporting you. If you've forgiven, then the problem is solved. No one needs to hear about your pain anymore. No one needs to take sides. No one needs to do anything. Do you see how none of these functions are really about your healing? They're all about convenience, about keeping things comfortable for everyone, except you. About silencing the victim so that others don't have to deal with the discomfort of what happened. And that's exactly what children of narcissistic mothers have experienced their entire lives. Their needs always coming last. Their feelings always being inconvenient. Their experience always being invalidated in the name of family peace. The demand for forgiveness is just more of the same. There's a crucial difference that almost no one explains. The difference between forgiveness and acceptance. Acceptance means recognizing that something happened, that it cannot be changed, that it's part of your story. You accept the reality of what was done. That doesn't mean you agree. It doesn't mean it's okay. It doesn't mean you absolve whoever did it. It just means that you stop fighting against reality. Stop wishing the past were different. Stop spending energy on something that cannot be altered. Acceptance is about you, about freeing you from the impossible struggle of changing what has already happened. Forgiveness is about the other person, about releasing the other person from the consequences of what they did. You can accept completely without ever forgiving. You can say, "This happened and it can't be changed," without saying, "And it's all right that you did it." You can find peace with reality without absolving whoever created that reality. And Carl Jung spoke a lot about acceptance, about recognizing the shadow, about integrating the painful parts of the experience. But he never said that you need to forgive whoever placed those shadows in you. The confusion between forgiveness and acceptance causes enormous damage, because people think they can't have peace without forgiving, that they're condemned to suffer until they can absolve their abusers. But that's a lie. Peace comes from acceptance, not from forgiveness. And acceptance is something that depends only on you. It doesn't require anything from the other person. It doesn't require you to feel something you don't feel. It doesn't require you to lie to yourself about what was done. Another concept that Jung explored deeply was the collective shadow. The idea that entire societies can carry unconscious patterns that cause harm. The narrative of mandatory forgiveness is part of that collective shadow. It's a belief that seems virtuous on the surface, but that hides a much more sinister function. It protects abusers. It silences victims. It keeps dysfunctional systems functioning. When an entire culture says that you need to forgive to be a good person, that culture is serving the interests of whoever hurts, not of who was hurt. It's important to question where that pressure comes from. Who benefits when victims forgive? Who loses when victims maintain clarity about what was done? The answers to these questions reveal a lot about why forgiveness has become so mandatory in our culture. Now let me talk about what happens in the body when you try to force forgiveness, because it's not just an emotional issue, it's a physiological issue. When you force an emotion that you don't feel, your body knows. It registers the incongruence, the dissonance between what you say and what you really feel. And that dissonance causes stress. You might be saying, "I forgive," with your mouth, but your body is tense, your stomach is tight, your breathing is shallow, because your body knows you're lying. And the body doesn't like lies. It reacts to them as it reacts to threats, with stress, with tension, with alert. Forced forgiveness is a form of self-violence. You're asking your body to ignore what it knows to be true, to accept a narrative that contradicts your experience, to silence itself once again. And every time you do that, you reinforce the pattern of self-abandonment that your narcissistic parents installed in you. Once again, your needs come last. Once again, your truth is inconvenient. Once again, you betray yourself to please external expectations. Jung would say that this is the opposite of individuation. Individuation is the process of becoming who you really are, of integrating all the parts of yourself, including the parts that feel anger, that refuse to forgive, that insist on maintaining the truth about what happened. Forcing forgiveness is denying essential parts of who you are. It's fragmentation, not integration. It's sickness, not healing. Now, I need to clarify something important. I'm not saying that forgiveness is always bad. For some people, in some situations, forgiving can be a genuine part of healing. When forgiveness comes from within, when it's not forced, when it arises naturally after a long process of integration, then it can be something beautiful. But that forgiveness is completely different from the forgiveness that is demanded. The forgiveness that comes from outside, that is imposed as an obligation, that you try to force because you were told you should, that kind of forgiveness doesn't heal. It re-traumatizes. Because once again, you're ignoring your own emotions to satisfy external expectations. Once again, you're being trained to put others first. Once again, your real experience is being silenced in the name of a more convenient narrative. Carl Jung would say that this type of forced forgiveness is a betrayal of the self, a denial of your inner truth, a form of dissociation where you disconnect from what you really feel to enact what you think you should feel. That's not healing. It's more trauma. So what does real healing look like without mandatory forgiveness? First, you need to give yourself permission to feel everything: rage, hatred, the desire for revenge, disgust, contempt, all these emotions that seem ugly and unacceptable. They exist for a reason. They are natural responses to injustice, and when you suppress them, they don't disappear. They just turn against you. Allowing these emotions doesn't mean acting on them. You can feel the desire for revenge without ever seeking it. You can feel hatred without letting that hatred control your life. You can acknowledge anger without exploding on everyone around you. Feeling and acting are different things, and you have the right to feel. Second, you need to recognize the truth of what happened, without minimizing, without justifying, without making excuses for your abusers. What happened was wrong. It doesn't matter if your parents did the best they could. It doesn't matter if they were hurt too. It doesn't matter if they didn't intend to cause harm. The damage is real, and you have the right to name it as such. Third, you need to grieve. Grieve for the parents you should have had, for the childhood you deserved, for the love you never received. This grief is essential, and it has nothing to do with forgiveness. You can mourn what you lost and still maintain clarity about who was responsible for the loss. Fourth, you need to protect yourself. If your parents are still alive and still toxic, you don't need to maintain contact. You don't need to expose yourself to more abuse in the name of being a good person. Boundaries are not a lack of forgiveness. They are self-preservation. They're sanity. They are exactly what a healthy person would do. And if other people criticize you for those boundaries, the problem is theirs, not yours. Fifth, you need to integrate the experience. This means making it part of your story without letting it be your whole story. It means recognizing what happened and how it affected you without getting eternally stuck in the role of victim. It means using what you learned about pain to build a life with more compassion, for yourself first, and then for others. Integration is the goal, not forgiveness, and integration is possible without ever absolving the person who hurt you. Now I want to pause here. If you've made it to this point in the video, it's because something resonated. Maybe you've spent years feeling guilty for not being able to forgive. Maybe you've wondered what's wrong with you, why everyone else seems to manage it and you don't. There's nothing wrong with you. Your resistance to forced forgiveness is healthy. It's a sign that some part of you refuses to betray your own experience. Again, honor that part. It's protecting you. This kind of content isn't easy to create. It requires courage to go against popular narratives. It requires deep research into what Jung really said versus what people think he said. It requires care to not be misunderstood. If this video gave you permission to feel what you really feel, the super thanks down below is a way to say thank you. It's not just financial support. It's you saying this truth about forgiveness needs to be more widely known. More people need to know that they can heal without forcing themselves to forgive. Every time you click that golden heart, You help me continue bringing this kind of uncomfortable truths that liberate, even when they're difficult to hear. Thank you to everyone who has already supported. You are part of this mission to liberate people from guilt they should never have carried. Now let me tell you about the concept of toxic forgiveness, because there's a form of forgiveness that not only doesn't heal, it causes active harm. Toxic forgiveness happens when you forgive to escape the pain instead of processing it. It's a shortcut, a way to skip the difficult work of really dealing with what happened. You say, "I forgive," but what you really mean is, "Please stop hurting me." The problem is, the pain doesn't stop just because you declared forgiveness. It just goes underground, and from there, it continues operating. Toxic forgiveness also happens when you forgive to maintain a relationship. You forgive because you're afraid of losing the person, because you can't stand the conflict, because it's easier than establishing boundaries. This type of forgiveness isn't an act of love. It's an act of fear, and it guarantees that the pattern will repeat, because the person has learned that they can hurt you and be forgiven, without real consequences, without a change in behavior, without any incentive to do differently. Toxic forgiveness also happens when you forgive because you believe that holding resentment is spiritually inferior. You look at yourself with disdain for feeling anger. You force yourself to forgive to prove that you're evolved, but this forgiveness doesn't come from the heart. It comes from the ego. It's a spiritual performance, not a real transformation. Jung warned against this type of superficial spirituality. He said that many people use religion and spirituality to avoid the real psychological work. They jump straight to forgiveness without taking the journey through the underworld, without facing the shadow, without integrating the dark parts of themselves. And that's not spiritual evolution, it's escape. True spirituality, according to Jung, passes through the total recognition of darkness. It passes through looking at anger and hatred and the desire for revenge and saying, "This is also part of me." Only after integrating that darkness can something like genuine forgiveness arise. But this forgiveness is completely different. It doesn't come from denial, it comes from wholeness. It's not an escape from pain. It's what happens after the pain has been fully felt and processed, and it may never arrive. And that's okay, because the goal was never forgiveness. The goal was always integration, completeness, the ability to live a full life despite what was done to you. Let me tell you what happened with a man named Robert. Robert was 62 years old when he finally stopped trying to forgive his father. For 40 years, he had tried. His father had been violent, alcoholic, cruel in ways that Robert still had difficulty verbalizing. And for 40 years, Robert had heard that he needed to forgive to find peace. He tried everything: therapy, religion, meditation, spiritual retreats, and every time, the same thing. You need to forgive your father. And every time, Robert tried and failed, and felt like a spiritual failure. At 62 years old, Robert read something that Jung wrote about how we don't need to resolve all conflicts, about how some tensions exist to be maintained, about how integration doesn't mean making peace with everything, but instead acknowledge the fullness of the experience. And something clicked. Robert stopped trying to forgive. Instead, he simply acknowledged the truth. My father was a cruel man. What he did was wrong. I don't need to forgive that. And I can live well, even so. And a strange thing happened. The obsession with forgiveness that had consumed 40 years of his life simply stopped. The internal struggle silenced, not because he had finally forgiven, but because he had finally stopped fighting himself to feel something he didn't. Robert passed away at 74. He never forgave his father, and he died at peace, because peace never depended on forgiveness. It depended on stopping the violence against himself to satisfy expectations that were never his own. Now, I want to give you a practical path, steps you can take if you decide to heal, without the obligation to forgive. First step, stop judging yourself for not forgiving. Every time you criticize yourself for still feeling anger, you're reinforcing the cycle of self-abandonment. The anger you feel is legitimate. It's a healthy response to injustice. It's not something to be eliminated. It's something to be honored. When you stop fighting against your own feelings, they lose power. When you give permission for the anger to exist, it can finally be processed. And only after being processed can it transform. Second step, someone who can hear your story without pressuring you to forgive. It could be a therapist who understands trauma. It could be a friend who has been through something similar. It could be an online support group. The important thing is that this person doesn't tell you what to feel, that they simply listen, that they validate your experience, that they recognize that what was done to you was wrong, without the pressure to transform it into something more beautiful. Third step, allow for grief. When you stop trying to forgive, you can finally grieve. The grief you were delaying, grief for the parents you should have had, for the childhood you deserved, for the love you never received. This grief is essential, and it has no deadline. It can take months, it can take years, it can have waves that come back when you least expect it. Allow everything, without trying to rush, without trying to get anywhere. The grieving itself is the work. Fourth step, establish boundaries. If your parents are still alive, you don't need to maintain contact that hurts you. Boundaries aren't revenge, they're self-preservation. You can love someone from a distance. You can wish someone well who can no longer be part of your life. You can have compassion and still protect yourself. That's not a lack of forgiveness. It's maturity. Fifth step, build a life that doesn't depend on resolution. Some wounds don't close completely. Some relationships don't get fixed. Some pains remain as scars. And that's okay. You can live a full and meaningful life with scars. You can find joy and purpose and connection, even carrying wounds that will never disappear totally. Life doesn't begin when you solve all your problems. Life is happening now, with everything you carry, with everything that was left unresolved, and you can live well, even so. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been pressured to forgive someone who hurt you deeply? What was that experience like? Did you succeed, or did forgiveness never come? Share, because when one of us speaks about the impossibility of forgiving, others feel less alone, less broken, less wrong, for simply being honest about what they feel. In the next video, I'm going to talk about parents who humiliated in front of others. The specific wound that this type of public abuse causes. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss it. Remember, you owe no one forgiveness. Your healing doesn't depend on absolving who hurt you. You can process the pain and integrate the experience and live a full life without ever saying, "I forgive you." That doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you an honest person. A person who refuses to betray their own experience. Once again. And that's exactly what Carl Jung would have supported. I see you. You carried guilt for not being able to forgive. You who felt broken, for feeling anger towards those you should love. You're not broken, you're waking up. And on the other side of that brutal honesty exists a peace that forced forgiveness could never offer. A peace that comes from finally being yourself, without apologies, without performances, without forcing yourself to feel what you don't. Just you, whole,